Welcome, everyone. I want to introduce myself first. I'm Christine Kovach. I'm the Bereavement Services Manager at Mission Hospice in San Mateo, California. We are the Peninsula's um, uh, help me, Elijah. Sorry. We're the Peninsula's nonprofit.
You want me to jump in for a minute?
Yeah, I do.
Mission Hospice is a hospice, palliative care, and transitions services provider. And we have been serving the Bay Area and the South Bay for over 45 years. We have a whole amazing offering of education programs, such as tonight. We also have really incredible grief services. So I'll pass it back to Christine to talk a little bit more about that. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. We serve the entirety of the peninsula from the southern edge of San Francisco down through the South Bay, San Jose, Sunnyvale. And we are so grateful to be able to offer special programs like this. So we're here welcoming Jamie Byron from CARA this evening, another incredible organization on the peninsula. Thank you, Jamie, so much for being here with a special presentation about supporting children in grief. So I'm going to let Jamie drive this evening, and I'll be here helping to monitor the chat. And you all are welcome to ask questions along the way and put things in the chat, and we'll make sure that you all are part of the conversation as you would like to be. Welcome, Jamie, please.
Thank you. Thank you both to Elijah and Christine for giving me the floor and allowing me the opportunity to connect with you all this evening. My name is Jamie Byron, as they've so graciously stated. I'm the Director of Adult Services at CARA, and I've been with CARA for last 10 years, so a decade in this research in this field, in various roles and capacities. And this evening, I've been asked to sit with you all and walk through how we support children in their bereavement process. Some of you on this call may be parents yourself. Some of you may be interested supporting caregivers along the way. Some of you may be interested as students who are entering this field in grief and bereavement. All are welcomed. I do want to let you know, as anytime we touch the field or topic about grief and bereavement, it can hit home and be very personal. So I ask that you all be graceful with yourselves and give yourself the most generous help along the way. If you need to step away, if you need a moment, please do so. What's beautiful is this is recorded. And so if you need to retrace any steps, if you want to rehear anything, graciously, Mrs. Hospice is making it available. And I believe Elijah has put that on the link for y'all. So in your time, please be kind to yourself. If you need to take water, step away, do what you need in this time. The second big request I have for y'all is if you have questions, I would love to hear from them. Please utilize the chat function, or if you're comfortable coming off mute, you are more than welcome to engage at any point. I encourage this because I want you to take the information that you need away. There's always more information than time to cover. So I want to make this efficient and effective for you in this time frame. My last ultimate request that I have is sometimes when we talk and share openly about our grief, we can tend to share things a little ahead of us. I ask that if you hear something shared by a participant in this group, that we respect the privacy. We know grief it's not a secret that we have mourning and grieving. It's not a secret that some of our people have died, but it is private in how we are expressing and exploring that. And I would just like to honor that in this room today, should people choose to share a little bit about themselves in this time, in this space.
And Jamie, I'm going to add to that point. If anyone has a question they prefer to ask confidentially, you can send it to me or Christine directly, and we are more than happy to read it aloud without mentioning any names, just to create that safe space for everyone as well.
Thank you. It's a beautiful addition. So before I kick off my training and presentation, I thought I would actually start with a video where we can hear from children themselves describing their grief. Some of us have maybe small ones in our lives that are so close to, and they may be living this in their day-to-day. And some of you may be wondering what it's like for a child in grief. So what I thought would be appropriate is to kind of highlight an offering that we do at CARA. CARA partners with Mission Hospice very much. We are partner agencies in a lot of the offerings we have. And one of the offerings that CARA has that Mission Hospice supports graciously is Camp CARA. Camp CARA is a free bereavement camp for children ages 6 to 17, school aged. And so in this magical space that we have for camp, which has been going on for 15 years, it's been going on for quite some time, is we allow children to explore and tap into their grief. And so what I'd like to show is a little bit about that camp, but predominantly you get to hear from children about grief and what does it feel like for them. And that's going to be the kickoff for what we're in store for this evening.
So this is really a transformational place. What camp does is it teaches the kids to pull apart the pieces, to understand their grief, to not be afraid of it, and to feel that it's normal.
We bring a bunch of kids together who have experienced the death of someone really significant in their lives. It feels actually just as much as like a celebration of that person's life that was so important to that child, and a celebration of the child's life right now.
I love the energy that it has, how everybody is so nice and inviting, and you are surrounded with so many supportive campers and counselors here and staff. You could just come here, have fun, it's just hanging out with people who really understand what you're going through.
They teach you to handle your anger, your emotions, your feelings in a way that doesn't hurt you or others. And I find that really helpful because after my dad's death, I got really angry, really sad, and I really didn't know how to process it.
We're asking the kids to walk towards some of the hardest, darkest places in their psyche, their feelings, their memories. And in order to do that, you have to have a place that's beautiful, and you have to intersperse it with really fun activities and really good friends and laughter.
Some things I enjoy about camp is just being around kids who are dealing with the same things as me, and it just really helps to be around people who understand what you're going through and who can help you heal.
Because I've been talking to so many people that are new to me and hearing their stories, I've learned to become a better listener and try to not compare stories, but try to understand how people are feeling instead. That way I can support them in the way they need.
What I learned is that I have lost someone that is grieving. We're trying to cope with it, and we're supporting each other and helping each other through the process, just one day at a time.
Some of my counseling colleagues are with the 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. The things that they're teaching those 7-year-olds today are going to be alive in them when they're 40, 50 years old, because they're placing deeply within them the basic foundations of good emotional health. How could anything be more meaningful than that?
I like how you get to be with other people and bond with them, and it feels like your emotions are okay here because other people have been through what have you gone through. It's like okay to be sad, you know?
I think that some of the tools the kids get to go back home with are an ability to cope with some big varying range of emotions, from knowing what sad feels like, happy, angry, guilty.
I need to just be okay with all those feelings, and I think that will help me become a stronger person overall, because then I'll be more in control of my emotions, and I will be able to help other people if I need to, or just help myself. Whatever emotions I'm feeling, it's okay, because everybody has their own grieving process that they go through when they lose somebody. If you're feeling sad, angry, or even happy, that's okay because it's your own emotions.
I'd say that everything I've learned here at camp I can use in my daily life. They taught me how to process it, how to deal with it, and how I can kind of feel like I have a normal way of life again.
This is a great way to help kids, like everybody out there that has lost someone.
So sweet every time. As you know, okay. I love how she says it at the end of her little speech, because it's so heartfelt and so true. So what we'll be covering this evening is we're going to be looking at how do we support our kiddos. If you take anything from what we're talking about this evening, it's the first quote I read to you. And also, if you notice in the video, it's not all talk-based. And we're going to talk about what are some creative ways we can work with kiddos, what are some creative ways we can engage with their world and what they're processing by invitation, of course. And so that is the impetus of what we're going to be working with, and letting our young ones in our lives teach us about their grief, because as much as we may love them and support them and have our own grief experience, we are not the expert in their grief, only they are. And we can only hope to learn from them along the way. So my hope for this evening is that you will walk away with some tips, a few little tricks of how to get engaged into our little ones' worlds, and hopefully be a supportive presence in their life as they are navigating and allowing their grief to forever evolve. Alrighty, so let's get rolling. Okay. There we go. So just as an overview of a splash page of what Cara has to offer, if you're interested in any of these supports, feel free to access any of our, you can go on our website. You'll also find that video on our website if you care to share it with other people, or share it with your own kiddos if they're interested in camp and are a little nervous and not know what to expect. Our website is full of resources that you are more than welcome to access. These slides, I'll have you know, Elijah will post them and make them available as well. So if you would like to fastidiously take notes, feel free to do so. But if you want to sit back and listen, you are able to do that too, because the information will be available. So I want to kick off the intention of our evening with this beautiful quote by David Kessler, and I'm just going to read it out loud. And it says, "Each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint, but what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. That doesn't mean needing someone to try to lessen it or reframe it for them. The need is for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of their loss without trying to point out the silver lining." There's a lot we can do to support each other and children throughout this process, but I don't want to miss the single most important piece, and that is being witness, bearing witness to some deep pain. To do that, it sounds so effortless, but truly it takes quite a bit to be a witness to someone hurting and not be able to fix it and not try to fix it, but rather accompany them in the process. Part of one of the biggest pieces of supporting a child is trusting that grief is both natural, normal, and necessary. And so hopefully we can gain some confidence throughout this presentation, that we can trust that our child's grief, however big, however loud, however small, however hidden, that it is truly natural, normal, and necessary for them as they re-engage and reframe a world without their significant person. And so that's hopefully when we sit and witness and we can look and be fully present for them, that we help them do the one thing that they feel most, and we help them not feel alone. And ultimately, if you can help somebody not feel alone and that they matter, that is the biggest gift we can ever give somebody. Okay. So how do we walk through this? How do we sit with kiddos in grief? I want to talk a little bit about how grief looks and how grief is understood at different age stages, because you could imagine a 17-year-old is going to understand death quite differently than maybe a 6-year-old, than different than a 12-year-old. So I'm going to break down those different areas and kind of ways in which, as brain develops, their concepts of an abstract thought such as death really becomes into their being, and how behaviorally grief may present itself, so that you're a little more cued in to what's going on with our kiddos at this time. As we go through, I do want to talk about two concepts, and I just want to define grief and mourning to help specify our conversation we're having. And so the first is I want to talk about grief, and I want to frame it as grief is the process of adapting to change involving loss. So notice it's an adaptation process and it involves loss. It's not death specific. And I want to be very clear about that. Many people think, and it's not uncommon, that we believe grief is only inspired by death, but grief has happened throughout our children's life. It's just done to various capacities. I also want to acknowledge that there are some hard situations our children have gone through, or maybe we've gone through, that we maybe haven't acknowledged as grief. I'll state them here: divorce, separation, incarceration, deportation, immigration, job loss, and home loss. Those 7 examples I have stated, and I'll say them again: divorce, separation, incarceration, deportation, immigration, job loss, and home loss. Those 7 life events will facilitate a similar grief experience as if a death has happened. Okay. The difference between death and dying in those 7 isn't that one is worse or easier than the other. That is not true at all. The difference is death and dying touches on the one thing it is to be human is your mortality. We will all die. To be human is to be mortal, which means we are forever in a grieving process. It's crazy to think that in this hour presentation, 55 million people in the world will have died. We know that because it's part of the condition of being human. The crazy thing is we don't think it'll happen to us. And what it is being able to sit comfortably with that. It doesn't mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean you're not going to fight it and live out to the best of your life. It just means not ignoring the reality of our impermanence and what we are. And there is great wisdom that death can teach us. Painful, but it can teach us. Okay? The other thing about grief is it's a complex mixture of thoughts and feelings and experience, and it's very internal. Unfortunately, with our modern day and age, and especially with children, I'll be honest, we assume that grief is made for public consumption, but it's not. Grief is quite private. If a child chooses to share it, that is an honored space to enter. And we assume because we have really well-intended, we want to help, but we have to be very careful of not co-opting a child's story or accidentally projecting our intentions or understanding of what they would say. So an example I can give you is I worked with a 14-year-old who went to his dad's funeral, and his dad's funeral had 200 people show up. And he said, my dad's funeral, 200 people showed up. Now there are 2 responses you can have to that. Oh, wow, your dad was amazing. You must have felt so honored. Or how was that, having that many people? The first is an evaluation and a well-intended judgment that doesn't make space for the child to decide. The second is an invitation should the child choose to wish to continue conversing. And again, it's just a skill. It's well-intended, but let's put some skill behind it. We want to make observations, not evaluations during this process, okay? Second, and I said this before, grief is natural, normal, and necessary. It is a process. We go through many changes and we have many losses in our lives. And so we oftentimes have to take a pause or allow our brains, our hearts, and our bodies to catch up and realign. Okay. Now, conversely, you'll hear a topic like mourning, and mourning is very much an outward expression of grief. It's what it publicly can be viewed. It can look like many things. It can be crying, talking about the loss, sharing memories, journals, prayer, support groups, art. It is the outward expression, and it's actually how we heal, and it's often what is taught to us. And so mourning is a taught or instructed phase. All right. Grief is natural, and we don't always know how it's going to manifest. Mourning are skills or framework in which we are taught. Okay. So children in grief, first and foremost, there was a long-held belief that children don't grieve. Children, they're not fully developed, they don't grieve. And that's not true at all. They just grieve differently than adults. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We just have to be a little bit more wise about what is their grief looking? How does it present? Okay. So of course you can imagine, depending on the age, every child will react differently to grief, crisis, and trauma. Naturally, it has to do with their ability to process information and interpret the information they are processing. And so that is one of the big, every age range, and that's why I'm going to break them down, will understand grief very differently. Second thing to note, at each developmental level or situational challenge, a child will re-experience a death in a new way and will need to find a new way to reintegrate death into their lives. So what does that mean? Let me use an articulated example. And this one, I'll use an 8-year-old girl. And we'll look at an 8-year-old girl and we'll say that her mom was diagnosed with cancer and her mom had passed. And her dad, wondering what to do, says, okay, my 8-year-old girl is grieving. I'm going to send her to Camp Cara. She's going to connect with other people. She's going to process it. It's good. And she goes to camp and she finds a new way of integrating it. And she comes back and she's able to talk about her mom and share memories. And dad goes, great. But that 8-year-old girl isn't going to be 8 forever. She's going to grow up. And then maybe she turns and she's 16. And as a 16-year-old girl, she's talking with her other friends. And all of a sudden her friend comes over to the lunch table and goes, man, my mom is such a witch. I can't stand her. Can you believe this? She grounded me because I was only like, 30 minutes late from curfew. But, I can't stand her. And that 8-year-old girl who's 16 is listening to her friend And she feels socially removed because she would give anything to have a mom ground her. But she doesn't say anything. She wants to be a good friend and she doesn't want to break the bond. So she stuffs it down a little bit and goes, I'll process that a little later. And she gets some support, but she's noticing, that conversation didn't feel good. But she works through it. Then that 16-year-old girl grows up and maybe she's 22 and graduating from and starting a career. And she's looking out and she's saying, you know what? I'm starting my career as a young adult. I'm living in a new environment. I have an apartment. Dad moves her into her new apartment and dad goes away and the door closes and she goes, who's aware of me? What do I do? It's feeling like another sense of loss. But she gets a new friend network. She's starting to rock out and do a great job at her job. And then she meets somebody and at 28, she decides we're going to get married. And she's so excited. She's at her wedding day and her partner has her parents and they're walking her down the aisle and she's looking and saying, I wish I had that for me. But she has her dad and she looks out and says, okay. And she would never want her partner to not have that experience, but she's realizing she doesn't have it. But she puts a memorial table of her mom, has a picture, has an acknowledgement, and she goes to the ceremony and she's able to hold the sweet and the sour at the same time. And then maybe her and her partner decide to have kids. And at 32, at the birth of her child, she's holding her child and goes, oh my God, what is it to be a mom? I didn't have a mom past 8. Am I also going to die? I can keep going with this, but what my articulated story that I'm showing you is that every developmental stage this child goes through, the grief of her mom gets tapped in a different way. It's never the same. And they have to have a space to acknowledge it and integrate it. Maybe pull a new coping skill in, but acknowledge, integrate, new coping skill. And it's like this throughout life. And it's not because grief is a punishment, not at all. It's a testament to the love one has. And it's a testament to how our identities, identity of daughter, identity of mother, grow and change. And so that is why grief is experienced and re-experienced. And there's a need to find new ways to reintegrate death into our lives. Okay. Finally, I want you to note that grief is intertwined with normal developmental tasks. And often at transitional times, you will have increased presentations of anxiety or stress or worry that comes up. So what's a transitional time? Many times when we have children who are maybe in 5th grade and 6th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 12th grade, I'm doing very strict, they're changing their schools, they're changing their environment. So their grief will be tapped based on the change that's happening in front of them. And they're more susceptible to presentations of anxiety or worry at a bigger level because it's another new they have to integrate.
Jamie, can I pause you there just for a minute?
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
I want to just say something a little bit more about this, because I think it's tempting for adults to be with grieving children who in their current phase, they're adapting and they're doing pretty well, to think they're doing pretty well. And that's sort of the end of the story. And then the adults can be quite surprised when that next milestone hits. Wait, we were just in such a good place. Why is this so much harder 2 years later? Well, 2 years later, there's a new milestone. 2 years later, they're missing their parent at the new milestone. So I'm so appreciative that you brought that up. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll equate it this way. Exactly. I'll equate it this way. If you ever had an infant and they finally slept through the night and you're like, rock on. And then like a month later, they're not sleeping through the night. And you're like, what happened? It's because they're growing and changing. So look at it this way. When our grief gets tapped again, it's not like anything didn't happen that wasn't supposed to. They're growing and evolving. And we want that growth. We want it. And so we just have to walk through kind of that when our grief gets rocked a little bit. Okay. So let's look at, there is a beautiful resource, and Elijah, I'll send it to you. It's going to be developmental stages of grief because it hits all the important stages. So you're not seeing infants, like the infants, neonatal 0 to 3. I focused on school age, but if you want that information, I have it broken down all for you. And Elijah, I'll send it to you as an additional resource. But I want to break down 4 to 6-year-olds, 7 to 11-year-olds, and then our lovely teenagers. So you get an idea of what's happening at these stages. I'm breaking it down also by what neurologically and within their brain chemistry is happening at these timeframes, because these are significant plateaus of brain development at this time. So what's happening at this age, 4 to 6 year olds, they're really understanding purpose and direction. There's understanding of what's my intuition, what do I instinctually feel, and what logically makes sense. And so what I like to say about this age range is they're the ones that are like, what's that? What's that? What's that? Why? What's that? Why? Like this is their questions, and they go into this all the time. And so what's understanding, just so you know, within them is they don't really understand death as fully permanent. They oftentimes believe it's reversible. Okay. And that's just because they have this beautiful, magical thinking that happens, right? It's very much in this imaginative play. Anything can happen. It's a very creative space to enter. So their grief reactions that will come up that you will see is they will tell and retell about the death. And I want to acknowledge, as a surviving parent or as a caregiver to a child who is retelling and telling about the death, this can be really hard to hear that small voice tell such big words. I've worked very much with parents who, I had one parent whose daughter told everybody when she was 6-year-old, my dad died, my dad died, my dad died, my dad died. She told the bus driver, she told the crossing guard, she told her teacher, and this parent says, I can't, like, this just breaks my heart. Why is she doing this? And it's not a punishment, but what she's doing is she's trying to understand this nebulous, this abstract concept of death. And what she's doing, if you ever know, words have really meaning behind it. No one taught you what love was. You felt it before you understood it. And so death is one of the things that you have to feel before you understand it. And so what that child is doing when she's saying, my dad died, my dad died, my dad died, what she's actually doing, and it's what she's done as a coping skill her whole life as a baby, is she's studying the face. She's studying your reaction. Because when I say you, that my dad died, you look away from me. When I say my dad died to you, you look down. When I say dad died to you, your eyes get watery. I'm picking up what is the significance of this word that I don't understand completely. And I'm picking up understanding of this. And so telling and retelling the death, it has nothing to do with the answer you give. It's the permission to explore. That is ultimately what it is. It's the permission to explore. It's in the finding, it's in the looking, more in the finding. Oftentimes there's confusion and uncertainty about what this death concept is. This because they don't understand permanence at this time. Their brains is not wired for permanence at this point. It will develop. It's actually in the next phase, but right now, so there's a little uncertainty about it. So they may ask repeated questions. There is no way that you can give. I had somebody say, well, I told them the perfect answer, and then they asked me again. And then, or I had a parent say, I totally botched that. And they asked me again, and I got to say it right the next time. You're going to get this practice over and over again. It's not necessarily in the answer you give. It's in that, can I ask you this question? That's really what it's tempting. And so we're creating that trust with these children that you can come to me. I can be that person. We can sit in the unknown together. Now, they do have an increase in anxiety and fears about others, because as you can imagine, somebody just died. There's not there anymore. Somebody disappeared from their conceptual understanding. The peekaboo did not come back. So they could be fearing that'll happen to other people. So you may see a regression in some behaviors. They may act younger. That acting younger is a way to self-soothe and get the care that they need. Okay. And so it does happen every so often, and there's patience that will come to this. I will also say that some parents, if you have a partner die in the household, it's not uncommon that some parents, and this is okay, they want the child to sleep in the bed with them. That empty bed is really sad and hard, and the child wants it, and also the parent wants it. And so there's almost reinforcement of some younger behaviors. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to be very clear. That does happen. It's about self-soothing within the family dynamic. But I just want to acknowledge that sometimes as caregivers and parents, we actually enforce some of the regressed behaviors, and it does evolve over time. And that's okay. It's just part of healing that we do as a family unit. Okay. All righty. 7 to 11-year-olds. I love this age range. So what's happening for them in the brain? Well, they're kind of developing this concept of mastery, competency, their problem solving. So my younger kiddos were actually, what's that and why? These guys, their question is how? How does that happen? How is this coming to be? That is their question of this developmental phase, right? They're understanding death as a little bit more, they're understanding the abstract concepts of death, they're understanding the concepts of rejection, they're feeling rejection every so often, like this is really enlivened in this. And so they're beginning to see death as final and universal for others. However, just as it doesn't feel good and rejection doesn't feel good, they feel like they can and believe they can escape it by being good or trying hard. So this is where you're going to get a little bit more of those, like, I'm a good kid, aren't I? I'm a good kid. Like that reinforcement of, see, I'm a good boy, or I'm a good girl. I take the trash out, or no. And if there's siblings in the dynamic, they will tend to the other siblings or minimize the emotional outbursts of it to not dysregulate the surviving parent. So that they're okay. Or if a sibling died in the family unit and they're the only child, they will act as they're okay and be overly cautious so the other parents don't worry. They very much are very tending to others because they're so aware that death is a possibility and it's universal for others. They can perceive the irreversibility and inevitability of death and their own mortality. So these are the questions that they'll actually start, and it can make a parent get a little nervous when they start talking about, well, am I going to die one day? What happens with my body? Where does it go? Those are common wonderings because they want to know how does this work? How is it? That's all what it's based in. And I always recommend as a family, you decide to address how and what happens after death in your appropriate family constellation. And that works, and what you all practice in. Now, their grief reactions are fascinating. They tend to want to know increased interest in the facts around a death. And so they will ask more questions. They will ask a little more intriguing. Now, typically this would be okay, and it's managed in a lot of ways. You can take a lot of the scientific route about things for things such as cancer and other kind of corporal deaths that happen. Where it gets a little dicey is when you have more stigmatized forms of death, such as homicide or suicide, overdoses sometimes. And so what I highly recommend as a parent is before you even address your child about a death, you kind of figure out for yourself what you're comfortable saying, practice saying it, and where you're not ready to go. And that's okay, because you can give a child a limit and let them know that you're just not there yet, but you hope to, and that's okay. You just want to provide the reassurances around the stigmatized forms of death. The other part that can have parents and caregivers be very concerned is when there is a suicide. They say, oh, am I planting the seed for this child? Or am I giving an illusion? There's a difference between saying a loved one died by suicide and the manner in which how they died. Those are very different aspects. Okay. So you're not necessarily saying how they died in that train, gun, hanging, I name it, it runs the gamut. You're really just saying what happens with a death by suicide. They killed themselves. That's kind of where, well, how does that happen? And you can frame it in many ways. Some people take the mental health approach in talking about the brain, and that the brain has, it's like an organ like anything else. Our heart, what does our heart do? It pumps blood. What does our stomach do? It digests my food. Our brain is an organ and it has a function itself. Its functions are thoughts. Its function is organization. Its function is action oriented. And when our brain gets sick, oftentimes we can have conflicting thoughts. We can have impulsive actions. And when somebody dies by suicide, their brain has given a conflicting action and it's caused them to harm themselves and kill themselves. That's how you can explain it in a biological way to an understanding that they have. Okay. Now I want to be very clear as a parent and caregiver, you could practice that. And then you tell this child and they go, okay. And they don't want to know, or they don't. And you're like, and then you'll be driving. Goodness me, this will happen. Then you'll be driving to like back to school night. And the kid, right before you have to get out of the car and go face their teachers, you're like, by the way, how did this happen? And you're like, now's when you want to talk about it. The car is always when these conversations happen. It's my biggest trick and tip. Talk in the car if you can, or be aware that the deep conversation happens. The reason being is because you're not eye to eye. And that should be an indication of when you're going to have hard conversations. If you can, of course, you want to do it face to face, but you can also do it side by side. And there's a difference. Anyway, so increased interest around the facts. I caution you to prepare what you're willing to say and let them ask keep going. And then what happened or how much? They will pause and they'll ask if they want to know more. It's really hard when you're like, okay, you want to know everything, and then you flood them with too many details. It's about pace and cadence. Okay. So they may act like nothing happened or deny that things are different. And this is where I've had one parent say, is my child a sociopath? They didn't respond. They didn't react when I told them. Like, no, not at all. And so we walk that through because they may act like nothing happened. And if you think about it, it's because they don't want to upset the sole surviving parent or the parents in the surviving case, because their emotional dysregulation says that things are unsafe. And so they want to help, they may react to help contribute or keep things calm. They tend to show their grief, and this is indicative, observe it through play and behaviors. So they, shock, fear, embarrassment, humor. Their humor is fascinating. Also, the one way that you will see it too is and you'll see this with more verbal children, the gossip cycle or the talking they do on the chat or on the playground. And they talk about it with their friends. And they'll talk about it amongst that way. It's a way of sharing communications, engaging input. And so you also see it there. So if they talk about it in a way of demonstrating the behaviors. The one thing to note is at this age range, their peer relationships are increasingly more important. And so they're aware that they might be different from their peers. And so they may shut it down a bit more. Or they may not want to let too many people know. My biggest tip in asking these kids when they're going to integrate back into school, who do you want to let know that your person died? Who do you want to let know? It's about understanding that grief is private, and they have a say in who gets to know. Would you like your teacher to know? And we have to let the teachers know, to be frank, because they may say, I don't want them to know. I don't want to know. Well, okay. But what if, you need a break and you want to step away? Like, if they don't know, they may not let you take that break you may need, and you may need a break. Okay, maybe you can let the teacher know. All right. How about, and you integrate it in about who's they're going to know over time, and you give them the reason, because you could see the long game of why they might want that person to support. Okay. Alrighty. Teens, love these teens. So teens are beautiful. I just want to say that in the first one. I love teens. Teens are wonderful in the sense of what they're trying to do at this age range is they're trying to find out their individuation. Who am I? So we have what and why, we have how. These guys are who. Who am I? What's interesting about teens is they understand death. It's very similar to how adults understand death. However, they recognize their own mortality, but act as if it can't happen to them. They have this like invincibility to them, which is beautiful and also can be very scary for a parent if you have a teenager on how they work. So how does grief express? Well, just know that developmentally, biopsychosocially, they are supposed to separate from parents. From an evolutionary perspective, when we were dying much younger in our 40s and 30s, this is the age range when they were supposed to separate from parents, find their own communities, and then propagate. And so there's still that evolutionary code that happens. And so they are separating from parents, which could be really hard when your family is going through some hard stuff and you want to pull people in. That parent who's so worried, you want to pull them back in, but they're fighting their own biology and kind of being able to separate out. And so it's that tension that builds sometimes. Okay. They do reference their peer group a lot, almost more than they would their own family dynamics. Peers are incredibly important. And here's why. Peers are important because teens, their brain is really honing in on what rejection means. And rejection is the most painful emotional experience we can have. Our body does not process physical harm or physical pain different from emotional pain. It doesn't have a different system for that. It's the same pain matrix. It's the same neurons that are going. It's the same nervous system that's happening. And so when you break your arm, people will notice it and they'll see it and they'll ask you about it. And so there is some awareness of tending to. But when you have a broken heart, when you've been rejected, nobody can see that. And so it almost reinforces the isolation and it's just as painful. And so being rejected from your peer group, after you've already had a death happen, which you can perceive as rejection, it's almost too much to bear sometimes. And so just being very mindful that they may not tell their peers or want them to know that they've experienced something within the family. And so it's just being cognizant of that. And because it has nothing to do with being painful. And what we do know about the human species is we are pain averse. We do not like pain. Okay? What's beautiful about teens is their verbal expressions are far more prominent. I don't always know what their slang means, but I find it very intriguing. And so we work with that. I do want to caution you that if you have a very verbose and intelligent and very articulate child, do not confuse that with being emotionally intelligent. Those are two very different things. And oftentimes an articulate child will use words to cocoon themselves away from what they're actually feeling. So just don't let it trick you in that process. Also within teens is there is an increase in risk-taking behaviors that may occur, and every parent is going to scream at me when I say this. They are supposed to take risks. And you're going to go, Jamie, please, God, no. They are. But what kind of risks am I talking about? They should make that school presentation. They should ask that boy or girl out to a dance. They should try out for that sports team. That play, those are all appropriate risks. What kind of risks are those? Are ego risks. Those are risks that are going to tell them, who am I? What do I like? Right? And it's a risk to be vulnerable in that way. The risks that most parents are afraid of and caregivers are nervous about are drugs, sex, and alcohol. And I'll add in there reckless driving, because this is kind of when they get their driver's permit. Those those are risky behaviors. They're not necessarily risks. And so we want to watch risky behaviors. Risky behaviors typically stem from pain aversion. We want to numb some pain we are feeling. And so I want you to be mindful of that. If you're seeing risky behaviors, you want to be able to talk to them from a pain perspective. We don't want to necessarily get on them for the behavior. It makes us scared, but we want to know, what are they masking? What's hurting? We want to get to that root instead of creating a division. Is that making sense? Okay. Finally, the saving grace of teenagers, which I absolutely love, is they have more than any other age range a social consciousness that is more acute, right? They want to be a part of a bigger picture, a belief and ideology. It's so important to them because they want to know what's their place in this world. This is the age range that you will get those generational movements. This is the age range that sued the state of Montana for climate change, for not being accountable for the climate change. Like, that happens from this because they have this idea of social consciousness that is greater than any other age range. And that can be its saving grace in how you help and support your kiddo. A kiddo that had maybe a parent die from a terrible disease, maybe it was pancreatic cancer, they will do the march for pancreatic cancer and feel a sense of healing along with that. It is wonderful. If you have a child whose best friend died by suicide, they sign up for the Out of the Darkness walk every year because it's a sense of healing. So I want to acknowledge you can use or help give them, and remember, mourning practices are taught. You can show them exposure or teach them exposure of how to process their grief in a healthy way, and they are more likely to do it. And they're even more likely to do it if you do it with them, because they act, much as they want to say, I don't need mom, I don't need dad, I don't need my caregiver, they do, because they're still kiddos at heart. Okay. Alrighty. So how are we going to support these kiddos as they understand this grief that's coming forward? All right. So I want to put this piece up here, which is a beautiful work. So Alan Wolfelt specializes in grief and bereavement in children. He's out of Colorado and he has 6 reconciliations. I want to demystify. This is not a phase of grief thing. This isn't linear, not at all. These are just ideas and concepts of which we actually need to have reconciled within us. These are needs within our grief process. Okay. One need that we have is we have to be able to acknowledge the reality of the death. Did you tell your child that the person died? You would be so surprised by families that don't even say that the person died. They don't even mention it. Or they use a euphemism that the child doesn't understand and it gets confusing. They have to acknowledge that a death has actually happened, right? Because they notice these changes, they got to name it in order to understand the changes. They have to be able to have the ability to embrace the pain of the loss. We are a social species. When someone within our social fabric has died, we feel that. We feel that loss and it can be painful. We have to be able to teach our children to have the distress tolerance to hold that pain. Otherwise, their pain aversion will manifest in risky behaviors that we worry about. We have to have at least a space to remember the person who died. Now, remembrances can be large or they can be contained. They could be in a journal or they could be shared at a celebration of life. It's different for everybody, and it should be hopefully respectful to the family of origin. So, but remembering the person who died is very pivotal for an individual, especially depending on the age range, to help reinforce memories. Because you can imagine the younger the child is, the harder to maintain explicit memories of a person. Developing a new self-identity. Who am I as a motherless daughter? Who am I as an only child now that my sibling died? Who am I that my grandparent died and I don't have a grandparent? Those are all really important questions. So much of our identity is based on relationship. You define yourself as mother, daughter, niece, nephew, son, father. How we relate to other people oftentimes is a part of our identity. So part of reestablishing a sense of self or a sense of understanding after death is being okay with the new self-identity we have. Okay. Searching for meaning. This can manifest in a bunch of different ways. It could be collecting stories about the person. It could be looking at photos. It could be putting photos away. It could be doing the out of darkness walks that happen, just something that is meaning making for them. Okay. And finally, because grief is not an end, there's no end to grief. It's receiving ongoing support from others, or knowing that you can, where to access that support, knowing that this is going to be something that 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you may want to get some support for. Okay. So let's see, what are we looking at kids? My number one ground rule is let children teach you about their grief. I said this in the top of it, and I'm going to say it again. We are not the experts of our children's grief. We know a lot about our children, don't get us wrong, especially if you birth them or you raise them from the ground, like from infancy onward, you know a lot about your child, don't get me wrong. However, their grief, everybody's grief is unique. Their relationship is very different. And so I want to be very clear, in the families of origin, from a adult perspective, if you are a parent and your partner died, you're mourning your spouse partner dying, they're mourning their father, mother dying. If you have lost a child, you're mourning your son or daughter, they're mourning their brother and sister. Very different relationships. So the grief is going to be different. You may not, so we have to honor and let them teach us about it. And that's hard. It's really hard because it's something we don't know about our child, and that's scary. So be honest with yourself about your own thoughts, feelings that are coming up. You may have judgments, and that's okay. You may wonder about the situation, their reaction, your own ability to help them. Truth of the matter is, be kind to yourself when a judgment comes up. Okay, be kind to yourself in this process, because when you're judgmental towards another person or yourself, you can't be compassionate. You can't access that. And so we want to practice the skill of compassion, of sitting with suffering and being okay with it. So take some deep breaths. Be okay that you're not going to be able to control the outcome. And I'll be honest, the worst has already happened. The person has already died. There's not necessarily much you can do in messing it up if you're sitting side by side with somebody. And that may sound really crass, and I don't mean that cheekily, but I mean to say that simply showing up for somebody, you're doing a lot in that process. Okay. Children's feelings are their allies. As you've heard in the video, so many emotions come up, and sometimes they don't even know if it's okay or not. And the emotions are dictating orientation to the new world that's happening around them. I want to acknowledge that grief is often more physical for younger kiddos. They have a lot of physical, because they can't necessarily name and tame their feelings yet. So you'll see a lot of behavioral, like jumpiness within their own bodies, because it's happening for them. It's also, when you're able to put language to what's going on, it helps organize and orient a child. You see it all the time, but with further language development, it's pivotal and coincides with the neurological development and the object permanence of understanding what has happened. So with physical kids, you could say, gosh, your body's looking squirmy. Are you a little nervous right now? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Those can all feel very similar, but we want to try to name it the right way so that they can get the appropriate coping skill. Because I can guarantee you, when I am nervous, I have a very different coping skill than when I'm excited, but they look very similar and they can feel a little different. So I also want to acknowledge, for any parent, feelings are neither good nor bad. They're not. They make us feel good, they make us feel bad, but they in and of themselves are not good or bad. They're messengers. They're here to tell us that something has shifted around us and we're having a reaction to it. Susan David has an incredible work on emotional agility, and she says it this way: emotions are data points, feelings are interpretations of data, and behavior is data in action. I love how she slows that down and really normalizes that we all have emotions. Emotions are quite messy. We all are going to interpret those emotions and we're all going to act out those emotions. But there's a pause when we can slow it down for somebody. And a child's big feelings, while it may be hard to contain as a parent, as a caregiver, it really is something to roll with than to go against, because it's really them enacting or understanding these changes that has happened. Okay. I highly encourage you to take a deep breath when these things are going on and set the limit of safety. Now, it's fine for your child to be angry. It's fine for your child to express that anger and maybe make it physical. It's not okay for them to beat you. So you can set personal physical limits within that and reinforce that, and that's okay. And you just have to articulate for them and say, I can see that you're really angry. I can see that you're upset right now. You have every right to be. You don't have a right to harm me in the process. We're going to put safety on this. Because as your parent, as your caregiver, that is my one job, is to keep you safe. Right? And that's the line you're going to draw. So know the limits within it. Okay. I love this kind of piece. This is great research that was done out in, I believe, Scandinavia, I want to say, up in that area. They did body scans of emotions and emotional states, and they wanted to know, is there a common way in which we feel emotions in our bodies? And they found that our body has wisdom, and our body does have an overlay of emotion. I think they did 428 body scans of people in emotional states, and this was the average that happened. And you can see anger ignites in the hand, in the feet, rapid heart chest movements. It's really a cool spot. If you want to see this articulated out, just Google body map of emotions and it'll pop up, because this was made popular in Peter Levine's work, because he's a somatic therapist. But this shows how physical emotions can feel. Okay. And so a child's body language will tell you more about their emotional state than their words can if they're younger. All righty. Direct and truthful answers far underneath. It's very hard, but you want to have developmentally appropriate language that matches the cognitive capacity of the child receiving it and respects the emotional severity of the context in which you are responding. So what does that sound like? When you are looking at a 4-year-old, you want to say, I have some really hard news to say. I may cry right now, but I do want you to know your dad died. You don't say passed away. You don't say went to sleep. You don't say we lost your dad. These euphemisms we have for the younger kids is very confusing because they take it very literally. And I want to acknowledge, when you say to a 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old that somebody died, they don't necessarily have the same connotations you do to it. You have a longer lived life and a more developed brain that understands what that word means and how hurtful it can feel. And so what you're doing is you want to give them the appropriate emotional vocabulary. And that way it helps provide clarity. Because I can guarantee you, at our grief group at Caro, we had an 8-year-old over here, two parents lovingly talking. And one parent said to the other, oh, when did you lose your husband? Oh, I lost my husband 6 months ago. And that 8-year-old overheard mom talking to another mom and go, wait, dad's been lost? Why haven't we been looking for him? And got very upset. And it's just, he didn't understand the euphemism that two adults clearly understood. So direct and truthful answers, while it could be painful to say, it's for the benefit of the child and the clarity of it. Okay. So keep in mind your word choice. Like I said, please try and stay away from euphemisms, your tone, and your pace. So you want to kind of slowly feel it out. Take some deep breaths. I always like to put the disclaimer, this is really hard for me to say, and I may need to take a deep breath. That gives you permission as the caregiver, the parent, the deliverer of news, to take your time, okay? And allow the child to know that there is something still. They're not just going to run off and go watch Snoopy right away. They're going to wait until you finish what you have to say, okay? Remember, children will ask if they want to know more, and they may ask multiple times regardless of your response. Your response may be beautifully articulated, or maybe you botched it. That's okay too. They're going to ask multiple times because it's about sinking in. I took a class to help give death notifications with police officers, and for adults, they tell you have to say it 3 times. It's the rule of 3. Because the first time you say it, you get the shock. The second time you say it, their ears aren't really tuned in. The third time you say it, they're finally on board. So if that's for adults, imagine what it's like for children. You may have to say it in 3 different times, okay? Alrighty, so we are supporting a process when children ask multiple times, and it's more about the searching than the uncovering on that piece. We also want to have the power of acknowledging what is coming up for it. Please use I statements. We really want to practice those I statements. I don't know. I can't imagine. I wonder that too. All of those are beautiful statements. Be mindful of statements that are really well intended, but limit the opportunity of the person to truly express how they feel. Everything's going to be okay. Mommy's got this. Daddy's got this. Don't worry. You can cry, sad, be angry. It's all good. It's all okay here. Really well intended and well packaged, but limiting in how a person maybe actually be feeling. They may not feel any of those things, or they might be so numb, you're telling them how they should feel, and they feel incompetent in the end because they're not feeling anything. I can't tell you how many children were told, it's okay, you can cry, and they couldn't cry because that just wasn't their reaction to it. And they felt they were wrong in the process, or they were dishonoring their person. Again, well-intended, cry, it's okay, you can cry here. Tears are okay. Well-intended, the impact is sideways. So we want to be sure that say, I can't imagine what you're going through at the moment. Whatever you're feeling, no, it's all welcome here. Even if you don't know, it's okay. I got you. Whatever you want to say in that. Supportive, caring adults and peers who respect grief is allowing them to express feelings and be heard. You always want to be available, but not intrusive. I'm here if you want to talk or if you need me. This is what I use for older adults more than anything, or older kiddos, older teenagers more so. And I told teenagers, my tip to them is when they have a bereaved parent or they have a sibling that has died, I say, give your parent a task to do. I would really love a Jamba Juice. Can I get a Jamba Juice? Because you give a parent something to do to tend to you and you get some space in the process. And so it goes both ways where we're taking care of each other. Okay. Provide a range of outlets for expression of grief. We don't know. You noticed in that video, I hope you picked it up, there were conversation points, there was drawing points, there was physical activity. All three are super important. So break it down, mind, body, and heart, because the mind is taking in information, the body is taking in information, and the heart is taking in information. So what happens with grief is we want to integrate it as much as possible. So think about ways to tackle all three of these areas. For the mind, you can play games. Gameplay is super helpful. Problem-solving strategies in the grief process it gets them thinking forwardly, thinking about the future emulation strategy, gives them a sense of agency and control. Games are incredibly powerful for helping a child who is grieving, very much so. And also, if you are the caregiver or parent or family member playing with them, it reinforces attachment and security. Body movement is so helpful. Stretching, hiking, sports, dance, you just got to get moving, anchoring. And one of the things I will say, if you have a person that died out of country or the body was never recovered or there are no remains, which that sometimes does happen, you may want to anchor a person's grief to an external environment. That could be helpful. So what do I mean by that? You could use a trail that you go to hike. That was maybe their person's place of significance. You can do it to a part in the room, a garden in the house. You can do something within the backyard. You do want to anchor it in something tangible if you don't have physical remains to help with that. It could also be to a candle and have physical movement around how you light the candle and noting. I'm really close on time. I think I have one more slide for this piece. Heart, you can look at creative outlets. So listening to music, creating with one's hands, painting, Zentangle, baking, cooking. You can also tie creation to giving to another person. I baked cookies. I don't want to eat them all. I'll give them to somebody else. Acts of service and being thanked for something restores value or restores a sense of self. Finally, when we're looking at kids, we want to give them choice in expressing and participating in rituals and ways involved in memorializing the person who died. Be very cognizant that when we're talking about celebrations in life, funerals, or any memorial process, we want to give the child as much choice as possible. Grief is disorienting and it marks times of change and loss. Two things instantly happen when a death happens. We feel out of control and we feel isolated. By accompanying your child, you're getting them out of isolation into community. You could be your child's community. Two people is community. And by giving them choice in what they're participating in, you're taking them from out of control to in control. The choice is incredibly powerful. And we want to help them restore decision-making power so they get a sense of control. It's very simple. I will also say, not necessarily regarding this, but regarding choice, chores are very helpful. And I know every child goes, no, but I'm serious. When you have a child to say, I need you to take out the trash. I need you to fold the laundry. We're going to unload the dishwasher. Now, they may struggle in doing it, walking the dog, they may struggle in doing those things, but if you do it with them, that is super helpful. You do it side by side while you're folding clothes. Those are opportune moments to connect with them. And you're also giving them a sense of agency back. Okay. That's what this one piece is, providing stability with a child. And I think that's where I'm going to pause because we are over on time. But I'll open it up if there's questions, comments, wonderings at this time.
Jamie, this is so beautiful. I am so, you just hit all the points I would have hoped you would touch on. And a couple thoughts came to mind.
Yes, ma'am.
One is, I think sometimes when it is a surviving parent who is the main adult in the child's life, especially at the beginning of the grief for the adult is overwhelming, just for the adult. And that, this feeling like I got nothing. How am I going to support my child when I am so depleted? And I think to remember that there are other adults in the orbit of the child. There are other maybe adults in the family, in the school, right? A counselor at Cara, the grief camp. There are other adults to recruit as part of the support village for the child, and it doesn't have to be only the surviving parent. And then the other thought that came to me is about, and you had mentioned so importantly about children protecting adults, right? And adults protect the children as it should be, right? We're supposed to protect children. But there may be some benefit for the grieving adults to show their grief when they're able, to model for kids, and even say, I'm going to cry sometimes. And it doesn't mean that I'm falling apart. I'm still here to take care of you, but I miss our beloved person too. And there's some real healing in being able to model that we can express the grief together.
There's a beautiful quote by Esther Perel, which is also a rendition of what Dan Siegel said. Dan Siegel has done a lot with Name It to Tame It, which talks about emotional regulation in children. Esther Perel took it to another direction, name it and frame it. What she means by that is name when the emotion has come up and frame around it what you need or what you will be doing. And that models for children how to name their emotion, but also the responsibility on processing it lies on the person experiencing it. So there's not that misinference for kids to take care of or parentified and taking care of their child and their parent.
Yeah. What other thoughts any of you can put in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute, any other thoughts, questions, observations? Letty, please.
Thank you. A couple of, through this process, I was even, I joined the call thinking of how to support my daughter's friend, who, we have never spoken about the death of her mom, which was a good friend of mine, because I was following her lead. And she has yet to verbalize. And same thing, I think in some ways, even with Dad. And I just, I visit, I call, I check in, or I should say text. But the point is, how.
Oh, you muted. There, unmute again.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Is it, some time has passed. It's, I think been 3 years now. And I'm just wondering, I guess what I'm hearing is me, it was also, I recognize the process that I was going through as well, right? I didn't verbalize. So I don't know. It's like, but then, it's an elephant in the room, right? We all check in and but no one's ever said anything. And it's just occurred to me that I want to be able to invite her and be available to having a more sensitive emotion honoring conversation and experience.
I'll slide in a little bit. Hearing that, how do you have invitations to this, or kind of bring it into the room gently? And one of my colleagues that I worked with and loved dearly, you're making me think of her. Her mom died when she was 10. And she said, Jamie, no one's going to remind me my mom died. Like, I bloody know. Like, it's like, so it's not like it's not unknown. And she said when after she was 10, she started craving people just mention her. Did she really exist? Is she a part of it? Is she ethereal? And one of the ways she taught me, she said, I loved it. My mom's best friend said, God, I loved your mom's laugh. I just miss it so much. And she said, like, her friends would share these things to her and she ate them up left. Her mom had a great laugh. Like, what did it sound like? Or it was comments about the living aspects of them that she started craving and loving, and it enlivened in a lot of ways. So I'm hearing you need some like, how do you do segues into these pieces? And so it's simple as, I was thinking about her the other day. We went to this Giants game the other day. It was crazy. Like the no-hitter at Matt Keane had, like she was huge about that. Like, you're just taking like common things that are happening and interests that she had
feels
and
right.
weaving it in now, because it's things you probably think about and you're able to probably access. And it's just depending on how old she was, it's just like uncovering her more and more. The other thing that my colleague taught me is her mom's friends wrote her letters and sent her on her mother's birthday, sent the birthday cards to her, and would write stories in that. And so every time on her mother's birthday, she would get her mother's birthday card with a story in it from a different friend. It was a different friend every time. Her mom was a principal, so the teachers rotated every year, and so they figured it out. But that was another thing that she was like, and it's written, it's tangible, it's real, it existed, and I held on. And she has all of them. And so that was another thing, that it's the day, I know it's her day. And so there's another invitation to look at.
That's beautiful.
So
Thank
hopefully there's
you.
some ideas. Yeah.
That's very supportive. Thank you.
It's never too late, right? 3 years have gone by. It's never too late to go in and
That's
acknowledge.
what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other reflections, questions? What I know is that more surfaces later, and maybe you'll listen to this again on when it's up on the YouTube channel, that, more revelations come afterwards, right? And there are really good resources on the CARA website. We have resources on the Mission Hospice website. Jamie probably knows this one too. There's just a beautiful website of resources called the Doogie Center in Portland, Oregon. Really good stuff about children's grief, multiple age children specific, things for the adults supporting children in grieving. Lovely stuff there too.
And there's also the Coalition of Grieving Students. If you are a teacher or school professional, that gives you scripts and actual videos you can watch of how to engage with a student at a school site. And they'll walk you through it. And I think it's Coalition of Grieving Students. Very helpful.
Thank you. Elijah is on top of it, putting all of these links in the chat if you want to copy them and put them in your browser.
And I will interject, as Jamie mentioned a couple of times, I will be following up with everyone probably in about the next week or two once the recording is available. And I'll send the slides to everyone. I'll send the link to the recording on our YouTube page. And then I wrote down a couple of things that I think Christine and Jamie both mentioned, and I'll throw those in as well, just in case you couldn't write fast enough.
Yeah.
This is so important. I'm just so grateful you could be here with us today, Jamie. And this is such a tender territory that you just touched in it so beautifully.
I want to be mindful of time as we're coming towards an end. Please utilize any sources. And I know I'll speak for Christine and myself. As agencies of bereavement, we love to consult if you have any small ones in your life and you're just wanting to idea share, I know Cara is always open to it. I'm sure Christine, y'all are open to it. Feel free to call in. We're happy to consult and give you the tools to better sit with those kiddos in a trusting and loving way.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Christine. And I appreciate everyone who joined tonight and everyone who's, watching or rewatching the recording later as well. And I hope you all have an amazing night.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
Take care.
Yeah.
everyone.
take good care.